Jack had exactly 3 years to prove himself, and he knew it. The promotion was coming, but only one of them would get it. What he did instead would haunt him for the rest of his life, not because he felt guilty, but because he finally understood what guilt actually meant. In that moment, scrolling through his phone at 2 a.m, staring at a text he could never unsend, Jack realized that some betrayals don't destroy you immediately. They destroy you slowly, from the inside, making you watch yourself become something you never thought you could be. His heart was racing, not from fear, from recognition. He was looking at the evidence of exactly who he'd become, and the face staring back at him from the mirror wasn't the hungry, determined kid who'd arrived at that office 5 years ago. It was something else entirely. Someone he didn't recognize, someone he couldn't respect. But here's what nobody talks about. Sometimes the person who destroys you isn't your enemy. Sometimes it's the person you were supposed to protect. Jack was 28 when everything started. He had one defining dream: to build something that mattered, to become someone people looked up to make enough money that his family would never struggle again like they had when he was young. He believed, with the kind of faith that only comes from hunger, that if you worked hard enough and stayed loyal, success would follow. That was his religion. That was what kept him going through the 6-day weeks and the nights sleeping at the office. But Jack had one fatal flaw. He measured his worth by comparing it to others. In his mind, ambition wasn't about reaching your own goals. It was about making sure you reached them faster than the person next to you. He didn't realize this about himself. Nobody ever does. But David saw it from day one. David was the person who hired Jack. More than that, David was the person who believed in him when Jack didn't believe in himself. They'd met through a mutual connection, grabbed coffee, and something just clicked. David was 7 years older, already established in the industry, and he could have hired anyone. But he hired Jack because he saw something, hunger mixed with genuine talent. Within weeks, they weren't just colleagues, they were best friends. "You're going to be bigger than me one day," David used to say, and he meant it. He wasn't threatened by Jack's ambition. He fed it. He mentored him, introduced him to people, gave him the hardest projects because he knew Jack could handle them. David had a quoted thought that defined him. "My job isn't to be the smartest person in the room. It's to make the people around me smarter." That was David, and that was exactly why Jack chose him as the target. 3 years into working together, the vacancy appeared. Regional director, a position that would change everything, double salary, authority over the entire division, the kind of role that either launched careers or buried them. When David was passed over, when the company decided to open it to external candidates, everything inside Jack shifted. The door opened. She saw his face. Time slowed down. Jack remembers the exact moment his best friend told him the news. They were at their usual lunch spot. David was calm about it, almost relieved. "I'm not the ambition guy anymore," David had said. "I'm the infrastructure guy. I build systems. You're the one who should apply." Jack felt his breath stop. David wasn't competing. David was handing him the crown. And in that single moment, Jack made a choice he didn't fully understand until it was too late. His world broke in real time, but not because of disappointment, because of clarity. Jack could see exactly what would give him the edge, and it would require destroying the one person who believed in him most. 2 weeks before the final round of interviews, Jack discovered something. During a routine audit of project files, he found discrepancies in one of David's major initiatives from 18 months ago. Nothing catastrophic. A miscommunication with a client, some documentation that didn't match the deliverables, a small accounting inconsistency. The kind of thing that happens in every organization and usually gets corrected quietly. But that wasn't the worst part. Jack realized David didn't know about it. The audit had caught it, but the report was sitting on someone's desk. There was still time to bury it, or time to make sure it surfaced right before the interviews. Jack's hands were shaking as he downloaded the files to his personal device. He tried to rationalize it. He told himself that he was just going to bring it up, that he wasn't doing anything wrong, that David would understand. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Jack knew, absolutely knew, that David would be honest about it. David would take responsibility. David would probably withdraw from the running himself, and Jack would be left standing alone with the prize. Jack thought about his family, about the mortgage he wanted to buy, about proving to everyone that he was more than just a kid from a struggling neighborhood. He thought about all the times David had held him back. Had he? No, David had never held him back. David had lifted him up. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Jack was starting to believe his own lies about why this was okay. 3 days before the final interviews, Jack sent an anonymous email to the interview committee. Just the audit file, no explanation, just facts that would raise questions. When David got called into a meeting and confronted with the document, he was confused. He explained the situation honestly. He'd already fixed it months ago. There were emails proving he'd corrected it, but the damage was done. The narrative was set. David had made a major error and tried to cover it up. David texted Jack that night. "Something strange happened today. I don't fully understand it yet, but I trust the process. I trust that the right person will get this job." Jack felt something die inside him when he read that message, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He'd already crossed the line. The next week, everything fell apart in a way Jack didn't expect. After the interviews concluded, everyone assumed Jack would get the role. He had the experience, the results, and now, the appearance of integrity. He'd never cause scandals. He was clean, he was hungry, he was ready, but something changed inside him while he waited for the decision. He'd won. He could feel it, but he'd also lost something he couldn't name. The old Jack would never have done this, but the old Jack was gone. Jack would catch himself staring at his phone, unable to open David's messages. David kept texting him, kept asking how the interviews went, kept being his friend, even though that friendship had become a weapon. Dark thoughts started taking over. Jack would lie awake at 3 in the morning thinking about what he'd done. Then he'd flip his phone and check his LinkedIn notifications, and those thoughts would transform. He'd deserve the role. He was talented. He was driven. David would understand eventually. They'd laugh about it someday. Except he didn't believe any of that. The moral boundaries that had always felt so solid were cracking. Jack started justifying things he never thought he'd justify. He found himself making small decisions that pushed him further into darkness. When a colleague mentioned they'd heard David might be looking at other companies, Jack didn't defend him. He let the inference hang in the air that maybe David was already planning his exit. He wasn't lying, technically. He was just being strategic. Someone at the company, Jack never found out who, offered him a deal one day. "If you want to really secure this," they said, "there are a few people who might question David's future stability. I could plant those seeds." Jack said no. He said it firmly. But he didn't report the conversation. He didn't tell anyone. He just filed it away as an option he'd kept open. Everything was about to change, but Jack didn't know it yet. 3 weeks later, Jack got the job. The call came on a Friday afternoon. He'd done it. Regional director at 31 years old. Everything he'd dreamed about, except it felt hollow. But that wasn't the moment that mattered. The moment that mattered came 2 days later. David called him. They hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. David's voice was different. 3 words changed everything. "I know what you did." Jack's entire body went cold. "What are you talking about?" "The audit file. I figured it out. I traced the email source. It was from your device during work hours. You were the only one with access to that information at that time." David wasn't angry. That's what terrified Jack. David was sad. "I looked deeper, and I found other things. You planted questions about my client relationships. You suggested to the executives that I might not be stable long-term. You took every confidential conversation we had and weaponized it." The power dynamic shifted completely in that moment. David wasn't his mentor anymore. He was someone Jack had betrayed so thoroughly that the word betrayal didn't seem big enough. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was David's next words. "I have evidence of all of it. I have the emails, the metadata, the trail of your manipulations. I could destroy your career with one conversation tomorrow, and I'm calling you to give you a choice before I decide what to do." Jack felt something shift inside him. Fear, rage, despair, but also something darker, a realization. David held all the power now, and Jack made a decision right then. He would not be powerless. Not again. Not ever. "I'm listening," Jack said carefully. What David revealed over the next 30 minutes shattered everything Jack thought he understood. It wasn't just about the audit file and the manipulations. David had done his own investigation. He'd gone to the company's board member, someone Jack knew but had never been close to. David had shown them everything: the deleted emails, the false narratives, the systematic betrayal. But then David told him something Jack wasn't expecting. The board member wasn't just interested in the ethics of the situation, they were interested in Jack himself, because the board member had been looking for someone exactly like Jack, someone ambitious enough to do whatever it took, someone hungry enough to cross moral lines, someone who could be controlled through that very same ambition. The job was never really about your merit, David said, and his voice was breaking now. They offered it to you because they knew you'd compromised yourself to get it, which means they knew you'd do it again, which means they own you now. David explained that the board member had orchestrated the entire situation, had planted the inconsistencies, had leaked the information to the interview committee, had set up both of them, Jack to be compromised, David to be the witness. It was a test, and Jack had failed catastrophically. But there was more. The board member wanted to use Jack to help push out the current CEO. They wanted Jack to be their inside person, their eyes and ears, in exchange for protecting his secret, in exchange for keeping his job, in exchange for making sure David's career was completely destroyed if he tried to go public with any of this. Jack realized in that moment that he wasn't just a betrayer. He was a puppet. Everything he'd done had been predicted. Every choice he'd made had been anticipated. He had become exactly the thing he hated, someone whose ambition made him controllable. David's final words were the cruelest. I gave you a choice today because I wanted you to know something. You could have been honest with me 3 weeks ago. You could have told me you wanted the job. We could have competed fairly. But instead, you chose this. And now, you don't get to choose anymore. For 72 hours, Jack didn't leave his apartment. He lay in bed, replaying every conversation, every decision, every moment where he could have chosen differently. But somewhere around midnight of the 4th day, something shifted inside him. Not redemption, not yet, but clarity. Jack realized something that changed everything. The board member had made one critical mistake. They assumed Jack's ambition would keep him compliant. They didn't understand that when you take away someone's dignity, you take away their fear. They didn't understand that Jack had nothing left to lose once he saw the cage he was in. He became the monster to defeat the monster. But first, he had to understand exactly how deep this went. Over the next 2 weeks, Jack did something incredibly dangerous. He became complicit. He played along with every instruction from the board member. He gathered information. He documented conversations. He built a case so detailed and so devastating that it wouldn't just expose the board member, it would expose the entire network of manipulation that had been happening for years. But the internal struggle was agonizing. Jack would lie awake thinking about David, thinking about the choice he was making now. He wasn't doing this for redemption. He was doing this for revenge. But somewhere in the middle of gathering evidence and building his case, something unexpected happened. Jack started thinking about David differently. He realized that David had been kind when he could have been cruel. David had given him a choice, even though Jack didn't deserve one. David had shown him exactly who Jack had become and given him an opportunity to change it. And Jack was about to use that opportunity not to rebuild trust, but to wage war. There was a moment where Jack almost backed out. He sat down at his laptop with all the evidence ready to send, and he thought about erasing it all, staying quiet, keeping his job, living with what he'd done. But then he realized something. Living with what he'd done was already destroying him. At least this way, his destruction might mean something. The confrontation started in a boardroom on a Tuesday morning. Jack walked in with a flash drive and a presentation that he'd prepared for weeks. He'd scheduled it as a regular strategy meeting, but everyone who mattered was there. The board member, the CEO, the legal team. David had asked to attend. He'd claimed he had insights on a client matter. I need to resign, Jack said simply. Everyone looked confused. And then he played the recording. The first of 12 recordings where the board member had explicitly outlined the manipulation scheme, explained how they'd set Jack up,
and described the larger corruption network that had been operating inside the company for at least 5 years. The board member's shock at Jack's transformation was pure and absolute. The room went silent, then chaos. The board members started making threats. The CEO's face went white. Security was called. And through it all, Jack maintained complete composure. But then came the unexpected twist. As security was escorting the board member out, the board member looked directly at Jack and said something that nobody expected. "You think you won? You became me. You're exactly what you destroyed me for being." And Jack realized that the board member was right. In trying to defeat the monster, he'd become the monster. The confrontation that was supposed to feel like justice felt like damnation. He'd been honest, yes. He'd exposed corruption, yes. But he'd also destroyed people. He'd weaponized truth the same way he'd weaponized deception. The price of victory was showing him the exact nature of who he'd become. 6 months forward, Jack was no longer at the company. The board member had been prosecuted. The CEO had been forced to resign. And Jack had become something unexpected, a whistleblower, a reformed guy, a cautionary tale. But what he'd gained and lost was impossible to balance. He'd gained his integrity back. He'd gained David's friendship again. Slowly, carefully, through months of rebuilding, he'd gained the respect of people who valued his honesty. But he'd also lost something that he'd never get back. He'd lost his innocence about who he was. He'd learned that his ambition was a weapon. And once you understand that about yourself, you can never look at your own motivation the same way again. David and Jack started a consulting firm together focused on corporate ethics. They'd joke sometimes that they'd been through hell and back to do it, but there was always an edge to the joke. Trust, once broken and rebuilt, is never quite the same. It's stronger in some ways, but it's also fragile in ways you can't quantify. One permanent scar remained. Jack would never be able to apply for a C-level position at a major corporation. His history as a whistleblower made him too much of a liability. He was free, but he was also limited. He'd destroyed his ladder while climbing it, but he'd also done something that mattered. The corruption had been exposed. Other people had been protected. A year after everything fell apart, Jack received an unexpected email from the board member. He was in prison. He wrote, "I've had time to think about what you did. I want to hate you for it, but I can't. You did what I should have done decades ago. You turned back. That took more strength than any manipulation ever required." Jack never responded to that email, but he thought about it often. He thought about the moment where he could have stayed silent, where he could have accepted the deal, where he could have continued climbing the ladder he'd rigged. And he realized something that changed everything. Ambition isn't the problem. It's what you're willing to do to satisfy it that matters. Jack's ambition hadn't destroyed him. His willingness to betray David had. And the redemption wasn't that he'd exposed the corruption. The redemption was that he'd finally understood the difference. Jack learned that success built on betrayal is a tower that inevitably falls. He learned that loyalty isn't weakness. It's the only thing strong enough to hold you up when everything else crumbles. He learned that becoming the monster to defeat the monster is a trade that always costs more than you think. But here's what haunts everyone who hears this story. If you discovered that your ambition had already turned you into someone you didn't recognize, would you have the courage to stop climbing and look down at what you'd become? Jack waited until he'd destroyed everything he cared about to make that choice. Would you?